Since January of last year, I've been testing the 22 sets of aftermarket bearings you see here. So in this wheel bearings guide, I want to share with you what I've learned and give you some helpful guidelines as you're considering replacing or upgrading your Surfskate wheel bearings. The first thing we'll cover is it even worth it to upgrade your Surfskate bearings? Next, I'll answer some frequently asked questions about wheel bearings. Then I'll go into some tips for keeping your bearings performing at their best. And then finally, I'll go into all of these different bearings that I've tried. I'll share with you my preferences on all of them. And you can use the timestamps in the video description below to jump to any of these topics. And in that video description, you'll also find a link to a blog post where I've given links to all of these different bearings that I've tried so that you can look them up for yourself. And before we get started, I got to give a quick shout out to my friend Gavin Conti, who as always has been very helpful to me in this process. So if you find value out of this video, I want you to thank Gavin on Instagram. So let's start with this. Is it even worth it to upgrade your Surfskate bearings? And if so, what are the reasons why you might consider upgrading? And the first thing I want to say here is just to get on the same page that there's no such thing as special wheel bearings for surf skating specifically. The wheel bearings that we use on our surf skates are no different than any other skateboard or longboard bearing. And also, there's no way for anyone to say what are the best bearings for surf skating or really any other application because there's just so much personal preference involved. My bottom line take on wheel bearings for surf skates is that honestly for most riders, relative to other factors, they are not hugely important. High performance, high speed bearings might matter for advanced riders in disciplines like downhill racing or LDP, long distance pumping, for riders who really want every performance upgrade they can get. But for most surf skaters and especially beginners, as long as your bearings are rolling smoothly, it's really not necessary to upgrade your stock bearings. So there are really four main reasons why you might want to consider upgrading your wheel bearings. And the first is obviously speed. And you might want that just to go faster for general cruising, or maybe you're bull riding and you want more speed in the bowl. The next reason is noise. Some bearings are louder than others and you might want something that's a little bit quieter than what you're riding right now. Another reason is smoothness. Some bearings just feel smoother than others. And then the final reason is durability. So if you ride a lot and your bearings get a lot of use, then you may want to upgrade to materials that will reduce corrosion so you can get more life out of your bearings. Now, as far as speed goes, if you're thinking of upgrading your bearings to get more speed, then you should definitely upgrade your Surfskate wheels first, because your choice of wheel urethane will impact your speed a lot more than your bearings. Now, that's assuming, of course, that your bearings are rolling smoothly and freely. So obviously, if your bearings are rusted and crunchy, then replacing your bearings is going to make a big difference. So I'm going to say the best bearings are bearings that are undamaged, clean, and well lubricated. So if your stock bearings are rolling well, then you probably don't even have a reason to upgrade. Now, will you feel a difference between your stock Surfskate bearings and high performance aftermarket bearings? Yes, of course. They'll feel a lot faster, you'll get other benefits out of them, but the question is, do you really need that speed for general surf skating? And I'll say that if you're a Surfskate beginner, you probably shouldn't even be considering upgrading your wheel bearings. Focus on riding first, and then when your riding improves and you want to start getting into customizing, then you can start looking to upgrade your wheel bearings. So with all that said, here would be the reasons why I would say you should consider replacing or upgrading your wheel bearings. The first and most obvious is that your current bearings aren't rolling well or they're noisy. They're probably damaged or rusted, and there's probably no way to revive them. You probably just need to replace them. The next reason I would say is that you're past the beginner stage and you're ready to start upgrading and customizing your Surfskate. The next reason I would say is because you want to maximize your speed, either for general cruising or for bull riding. And in that case, I'm going to stress again to upgrade your wheel urethane first, because that's going to make a bigger difference in your speed than your bearings. And then the final reason why you might consider upgrading is that you want bearings that are quieter, smoother, and or just last longer than the ones you're currently riding. And a final note on this is, if durability and longevity are important to you, then look for bearings that have ceramic balls and stainless steel races. Now let's get into some frequently asked questions about wheel bearings. The first question that you hear all the time is, what does the ABEC rating on wheel bearings mean, and does it matter? And the bottom line is no. The ABEC rating does not apply to skateboard bearings, and the ABEC rating does not tell you anything about the quality or performance of your bearings. And bearings with higher ABEC ratings are not necessarily faster than bearings with lower ABEC ratings. What ABEC stands for is Annular Bearing Engineering Committee, and that's the committee established by the American Bearing Manufacturer Association. And the ABEC rating is used to measure the tolerance of ball bearings used in very fast spinning machinery. The ABEC rating goes 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and the higher the number, the higher the tolerance. And a quick note on that, you may have heard of the name ABEC 11, and that's just a skateboarding brand name, and the number 11 does not belong on the ABEC scale. So again, the ABEC rating only measures tolerances that don't really even matter to skateboarding, and it doesn't tell you anything about the construction, the durability, the speed of your bearings. The next question is the free roll spin test a good measure of bearing performance? And by the spin test, I mean if you're comparing two sets of bearings side by side and you just spin the wheels on each of them, and if one of them spins longer than the others, some people think that that means that those bearings are better than the ones that stop sooner. And the truth is that is not a good test, and it does not tell you which of those bearings are better or faster, because it's not telling you how those bearings will perform under a load. Some bearings use thicker lubricant than others, so if we're comparing them in a free roll test, then the thinner oil is going to spin faster. But when we're skateboarding, we're applying weight and we're going faster. So when the bearings heat up from friction, the lubricant becomes less viscous and the bearings roll faster. And that's actually a good thing to have thicker lubricant in your wheel bearings, because it stays in there longer and lubricates your bearings longer. Now, the only reason that free roll spin test would be relevant is if your bearings are damaged or rusty and you're spinning them and they're not spinning, in which case you obviously should replace them. And a final note on this, I've noticed that some bearings kind of need to be broken in over time, and I believe that's because they come from the factories heavily packed with lubricant, and as you ride them, that will seep out the sides and they'll start rolling a little bit faster over time. The next question is, what's better between standard bearings and built-in bearings? Standard bearings require you to use spacers inside them, as well as speed rings on either side of them on the outsides. And built-in bearings, on the other hand, come with spacers and speed rings already built into them. Now, for me personally, it's a no-brainer that if you're going to upgrade your wheel bearings, you should go with built-ins versus standard, simply because spacers and speed rings are a hassle to deal with. And for me, I'm a huge fan of just eliminating those with built-in bearings. And that's especially true if you're doing a lot of customizing and you're doing a lot of switching wheels back and forth. The next question is, if you're using standard bearings, is it necessary to use a spacer in them? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. You should always use a spacer with any bearing. The reason being is because the outer races of your bearings are kept apart by the wheel core. But without a spacer for your inner race, you can easily over-tighten your nuts, which will put stress on your bearings. And this will obviously slow them down and wear them out a lot faster. The next question is, are ceramic bearings better than steel bearings? Personally, I haven't found much of a difference between ceramic or steel, and I really don't have a preference between them, honestly. A lot of people think that ceramic bearings are automatically faster than steel bearings, but that's not necessarily true because the balls themselves in your bearings account for only a small percentage of the drag. The majority of the drag is caused by the shield and the lubricant. So the speed of your wheel bearing is more a function of the construction and not the type of ball that it uses. Some people also think that ceramic bearings are an advantage because they don't rust like steel bearings. Now, it's true that the ceramic balls themselves don't rust, but your bearings are made up with other component parts, some of which have metal, and those other metal parts will rust. And so it's not necessarily true to say that ceramic bearings don't rust. I believe that the advantage of ceramic bearings over steel is longevity over time. So if you're riding a lot and really putting your bearings through a lot of use, then it may be worth it to upgrade to ceramic bearings. Now let's go into some tips for keeping your wheel bearings performing at their best. The first tip is, when you put on a new set of wheel bearings, you're going to notice for the first few rides that a lot of lubricant will spin out onto your wheels, and that's going to collect a lot of dirt over time. So for your first few rides, after you're done riding, just take a dry rag, clean all of that out, and you'll notice that that will decrease over time. The next tip is, if you're using standard bearings, make sure you're using spacers between them, or just use built-in bearings. Inner spacers are vital to the performance of your bearings. The next tip is, if you're not using built-in bearings, then also use speed rings. Speed rings compensate for potential manufacturing defects in your trucks to make your bearings roll smoother and faster. The next tip is, don't over-tighten your axle nuts. This pushes your bearings into the races, which puts stress on them, slows them down, and wears them out. So what I like to do is screw my nut down all the way till it stops, and then back it off just a touch to make sure that wheel is spinning smoothly and I'm not putting pressure on those outer races. The next tip is, if your bearings get stuck on your axle, then be very careful when removing them. And be sure that you're not pushing anything into those shields, as that can damage your bearings. The next tip is, if your bearings are making noise, then you probably should just replace them. They're most likely damaged or rusted. The next tip is, if you ride in the rain or through puddles and you get your bearings wet, well, when you get home, you're going to want to make sure that you immediately clean and dry them. Otherwise, they'll rust and you'll have to replace them. And then the final tip is just to keep them always clean and well lubricated. How often you need to clean your wheel bearings depends on how much you ride and your riding environment. So if you're riding a few times a week, then I would say you probably want to be cleaning your bearings 2 to 3 times a year. And if you're riding on a lot of dusty roads or maybe near sandy beaches, then you may want to be cleaning them more often than that. And I've already covered how to clean and lubricate your wheel bearings in another video, and you can find the link to that on the screen above. Now let me walk you through these 22 sets of aftermarket bearings I've tried and share with you my preferences on them. And I want to be clear here that I'm not really making recommendations. I'm just sharing my personal preferences after everything that I've tried. I don't use affiliate links and I have no reason to promote any bearings over another. So again, these are just my preferences, not recommendations. But I think that you'll find some useful information as I walk you through my process here. And I've got these organized by, first of all, I have them split by standard bearings over here and then built-in bearings over here. And they're organized by price from low to high going this way. So the standard bearings I've tried are Bones Reds, which cost $18.95. Cavini bearings, which cost $22.95. Seismic Tecton 7-ball XT Steel Classic bearings, which will cost you $25. Bronson G3 bearings, which are $30.95. Old Boy Ceramics Aust Mach 9 Air bearings, which are $49.95. Queen Nano bearings, which cost $65.90. And then finally, Bones Swiss Ceramics, which I kid you not, cost $163.95. And then the built-in bearings I've tried are, first of all, the Wholesome Holy Rollers. I believe these are the cheapest built-ins you can find for $15.95. Zealous Classic Steel bearings for $15.99. Waterborne High Velocity bearings that cost $19.99. Loaded J. Hunan bearings, which cost $24. Shiver ABEC 9 bearings for $29.99. Zealous Ceramic bearings, which cost $33.99. Bones Race Reds, those are $35.95. Heady Shake bearings, those are $45. G-Bomb Steel built-ins, and on these you actually have to buy a set of 2 for $49.95. You can't buy one set at a time. Fireball Dragon Ceramic built-ins, those cost $54.95. Bear Spaceball Ceramics, those are $59.95. G-Bomb Ceramic built-ins, and like the steel, you also have to buy a set of 2 for $69.95. Seismic Tecton 6-ball steel built-in bearings. Like the G-Bombs, Seismic also forces you to get sets of 2, and those steel built-ins will cost you $90 for a set of 2. Seismic Tecton 6-ball ceramic built-ins, and like the steel ones, you also have to buy them in a set of 2, and those will cost you $95 for a set of 2. Now again, if you want links to all of these, you can go to the video description below and you can click the link to the blog post that'll have all of these in that. So now that I have all these laid out for you, let me walk you through kind of my process of elimination that will kind of spell out my preferences of how I look at this. And my criteria for wheel bearings is simple. I want them to be quiet, I want them to feel smooth, and I want them to go fast. And also, as I said, I much prefer built-in bearings over standard bearings because that eliminates all the hassle of speed rings and spacers. So with that said, here is my process of elimination. The first thing I'm going to do is eliminate all of these standard bearings because for me personally, it doesn't matter how well they perform. Since they're standard and I have to deal with speed rings and spacers, I don't really care. So I just eliminate all of these and I don't use any of those standard bearings, and that leaves us with just the built-ins. The first thing I'm going to say here is Personally, for me, I don't think you need to spend more than, say, 15 to 35 bucks on a great set of aftermarket bearings. So when you look at this list right here, that would eliminate anything all the way up to these Bones Race Reds, which are $35.95. So what this means for me personally is that I'm going to go ahead and remove these Heady Shakes that cost 45 bucks, these Fireball Dragon ceramic built-ins that are $54.95, and these Bear Spaceball ceramics that are $59.95. So after eliminating those three, that leaves us with our set of that range between $15.95 with these Heady Shakes and then $35.95 with these Bones Race Reds. And then over here we've got some G-Bombs and Seismic Tecton 6 balls, and we're going to come back to those. And let's walk through each one of these that are left here. So starting with the Wholesome Holy Rollers. Personally, I don't use these because I find that they're actually a little bit loud. And then in this lineup, personally, I find that the Loda Jehu bearings are a little bit slow compared to others. So Loda Jehu bearings are not my personal preference, so I'm going to go ahead and eliminate them from this lineup here. After that process of elimination, my personal favorites in that range between 15 and 36 bucks are Zealous Classic Steels for $15.99, the Waterborne High Velocity bearings for $19.99, the Shiver ABEC 9 bearings for $29.99, Zealous Ceramic built-ins for $33.99, and Bones Race Reds for $35.95. Any one of those bearings are very comparable, work very well, and to be honest, out of all of those, probably my preferences is actually those Waterborne High Velocity ones. I think these are fantastic bearings. They're smooth, quiet, and fast. And I actually think that they're as fast, if not faster, than anything else in this lineup that's more expensive. As far as Zealous bearings go, you're going to hear about Zealous a lot. And that's really because they really are an unbeatable value. These Zealous Classic Steels are $15.99. They're about the cheapest built-ins that you can find. And personally, as I said, I don't notice really any difference between the steel and the ceramic bearings. So if I'm choosing Zealous, I really probably just would go with the $15.99 steel bearings over the $33.99 ceramic bearings. But that's just me, and you may want to try them both and experiment with that. So the final note I would say on this is, even though I'm giving you this range of what I'm saying is between 15 and 35 is a good sweet spot to look for bearings, I really don't notice a big difference between your basic $15.99 Zealous steel ones and your $20 Waterborne ones and any of these others that are more expensive. So for me personally, unless I'm wanting just like really high-end customized setup, I'm probably going to just go with those Zealous steel bearings for $15.99 or those Waterborne bearings for $19.99. So that leaves us with our G-Bomb steel and ceramic and our Seismic Tecton 6 ball steel and ceramic. And I've left those for last because, as I said, for some reason, both of those companies require you to buy sets of 2. So if you could buy sets of 1, they would be comparable to these others, but given that you're forced to buy sets of 2, it makes them automatically more expensive. But out of everything you see here, I think that these are probably your highest end bearings. I don't ever use these Seismic 6-ball steel bearings because for whatever reason, these steel bearings, I can't get them to stop clicking for me. In every wheel I've ever tried, and I've tried them on Surfskate Love wheels, Seismic wheels, Orangutan wheels, they always have this click for me. And that's only on the steel ones, not the ceramic ones. I have no idea why that is. So for me personally, I eliminate the Seismic 6-ball steel bearings. So for me, that leaves me with the best aftermarket bearings that I've personally found are these Seismic Tecton 6-ball ceramic bearings and then the G-Bomb bearings. And personally, I don't have a preference between either steel or ceramic on the G-Bombs. If I'm choosing between the Tectons or the G-Bombs, my personal preference is the G-Bombs. So that's my final conclusion, is that out of all of these, my personal favorites are G-Bombs. And G-Bomb actually offers 3 packages with those. You can either just get 2 sets of steel, you can get 2 sets of ceramic, or they offer a package where you can get a set of steel and a set of ceramic, and that's the package that I got, so you can try both of those. But with that said, I think that you can get fantastic performance out of any of the ones that you see here that are listed between $15.99 and $35.95. And as I said, I don't think it's necessary for you to spend more than 35 bucks for a set of really high quality aftermarket bearings. So that's my take on wheel bearings for surf skating, and I hope you found this useful as you're considering replacing or upgrading your bearings.